Becky Mollenkamp is with us today with a really powerful story and a set of tools for us. She runs a business doing content creation for other small businesses, and today she shares with us, as a business owner, what it was like to lose a younger sibling to bipolar disorder and a subsequent heroin overdose. It's brutal, y'all. Understandably, this life event ravaged her life and her business, but as you'll learn later on in her story, that experience actually prepared her for the inevitable moments of bravery that would follow. And without giving away all the good stuff, I'll just tell you that she and I ended up going through this must-have list of things you should definitely do when you or your business is going into crisis. And for whatever reason, relationships, financial, big or small crisis, you need to be prepared for what may or may not happen. And also you need to be prepared for how you can react to that. So I've included a killer download worksheet with this episode, which will help you to begin to make your own crisis toolkit. And that worksheet is available in the show notes for this episode. I'm really happy to have Becky Mollenkamp with us today. I think you will appreciate her vulnerability as much as I do. You're listening to Bare Naked Bravery, a weekly podcast hosted by me, Emily Ann Peterson. As a singer-songwriter, author, teaching artist, and creative entrepreneur, I encounter some really fascinating stories. I'm on a mission to reveal the depth and width of bravery and its benefits to creatives like yourself. More than ever today, our world needs bravery, unique bravery, from everyone. This is the place where you find it. There is no script or censorship today because that's how these facets of bare naked bravery are in real life. So if you're listening with little ears nearby, please know that some episodes may contain mature language and subject matter. One of the easiest ways you can share bravery with the world is to send this episode to a friend or two. Send them an email, text, or tweet. Tag them in one of my Instagram posts. My handle is Emily Ann Pete. Or leave us a review on iTunes. It takes seconds and can be done from your phone right now. Again, we need more bravery in the world. So let's be brave together. Becky, are you ready for some bare naked bravery?
I am.
You are in your closet right now because you have a little baby in the other room who is being watched, by the way. And I have done some podcast episodes from the closet, and I think it's so great that you've got ties above your head, and it's a colorful addition to all of this. So tell us a little bit. You do copywriting and content creation for other small businesses, which one is very cool. But two, I was really intrigued by your story because you've really hit the bottom of the barrel a couple times. And I think that having touched that bottom multiple times, that makes you brave, first of all, because you have, from what I can tell, you have chosen to face some of this tough stuff that people often try to run away from. Can you give me a little bit about maybe the first time you had to touch the bottom of that barrel?
Yeah, and it's funny, the word brave is interesting to me because people say that to me a lot. I'll have people say to me, one of the things they respect about me is that they think I'm so brave. And I don't think of myself as brave at all. So I always find that very interesting. I guess I just think that I'm unafraid, which maybe is the same as brave, but for some reason it feels different than me. Somehow brave implies that I purposely am, going and doing things that are scary or something. It's just more like I don't take the time to think about consequences on a lot of things, I think. So I've packed up and just moved multiple times and not really thought about it. But I think that sort of the touching the bottom of the barrel, like you're talking about, is a little different because that's been stuff that's been more thrust upon me, I think, than things I've chosen that maybe were more brave. And the first time is the big time. And that was when my brother died. That was 6 years ago. it'll be 7 years soon. So 7 years in July. He died on July 4th of 2010. He was my younger brother by 5 years, and my brother was a heroin addict, and he OD'd.
Was that something that everyone not saw coming, but was it?
Yeah, that's just what I was going to say. It's one of those things where you can go your whole life and kind of know that something bad is going to happen, but then when it does, it still doesn't feel real. My brother was really troubled. He was bipolar, which is something that can very often lead to drug abuse for people who are trying to regulate those crazy emotions that they're having, and a lot of those feelings of worthlessness and all sorts of things that come up when you have mental illness. And he had mental illness his whole life. And my parents and I too also tried to help in a lot of ways, some of the proper channels, the medications and therapy and rehab and all of that. But my brother very often chose to self-medicate. And that started very young. I mean, at 12, he was drinking. Drugs were soon after, it was lighter drugs and then heavier and heavier. And by the time he was almost 30, he was a full-blown heroin addict. And so when I got that call, it was the kind of thing that since he was 12, really, I always sort of knew my brother wouldn't live a long life. But it doesn't make it any easier or more real when you get the call from your parents saying, your brother's died. It's like, wait a minute, what? That's not really supposed to happen. Like, it was a theoretical supposed to happen, but not really supposed to happen.
What was it like to live with that, like bracing yourself for the inevitable like that?
Very difficult. My brother and I were very different people. I've always been a straight A student and a people pleaser and wanted to make my parents proud. And if a teacher would have been disappointed in me, it would have gutted me. Just having someone upset with me was enough to gut me, where my brother was, never thought about what anyone thought of him, and certainly didn't seem outwardly anyway to be concerned about upsetting anyone. I'm sure inside that was different. And so for me, as somebody who, was very concerned about pleasing people, I had a tumultuous upbringing because of him. And my mom and him were alike in a lot of ways, in that they were both very stubborn and hot-headed. They're both Leos and I'm a Pisces, and I don't know how much I believe in horoscopes and all of that, but I will say there is some truth to them both being fiery lions, and then me being that peaceful little fish who was always trying to just find harmony in my family. My dad wasn't really around. My parents were divorced when we were pretty young. And so I grew up really trying to always protect him, care for him, help him find peace with my mom and in his environment, because I always knew he was troubled. It was a lot of caretaking. It was a lot of being adults too young, and then I was almost 6 years older, 5.5 years older than him. And so, by the time I was 20, I was already dating the person I was going to marry at the time. We are since divorced, but I married much too young. Probably very much, a lot of it was about getting out of that situation. But so, he was still little, and I kind of left the home anyway. By the time I left as soon as I was 18. So he was only 13 years old or something, 14. And I think he had a lot of resentment about that I kind of left and didn't stay to take care of him. And then as an adult, my parents chose different paths than me. I really sort of felt that we needed to try some tough love at some point. And my mom was much more of an enabler. And ultimately what we've learned is that it doesn't necessarily matter what approach, if somebody is on that path, you can't always save them. They have to save themselves. My brother couldn't be saved. So I don't know that it mattered, tough love versus enabling. I don't know what would have helped. But because of that, I removed myself from his life towards the end, because I just couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't be a part of what I felt was enabling, and watching it and having it affect my life so much.
One of the common things that comes up in all of these discussions about bravery is the idea of boundaries. And there's usually always some element of boundaries when someone is doing something brave. They are aware of their own limitations and they're choosing to go beyond it. Or in your case, you did the brave thing and cut the cord, and created some distance between you and your brother because you knew you needed it. And I think that's something that is not often considered as brave, creating boundaries, but it's something that is an integral part of some of the brave behaviors and acts of bravery that happen after the boundaries have been set up. So
Yeah, and it's interesting. Again, that's something where I don't necessarily think of it as brave, but maybe it was. I mean, it was certainly difficult. So if doing the difficult thing implies bravery, then I suppose I was brave at that time, because it was very difficult to establish those boundaries, knowing that it meant my parents would be upset with me, particularly my mom, and that I wouldn't get to have them in my life as much. And that was hard. But also I knew I couldn't be a part of the chaos and the dysfunction that was going on. Of course, left me with a lot of issues after my brother died, a lot of guilt and regret. But I also think, having watched my mom go through it and knowing that she did not choose that same path and was also left with just as much guilt and regret, that it helped me in a way, seeing that, because I knew it wouldn't have mattered what path I had chosen. I was going to have those same issues.
Yeah. I think that happens with business owners who struggle with depression, or the business owners who have bipolar themselves, or artists who have these recurring issues or stories of mental illness that come up. Like, you choosing the right group of people to surround yourself with is important, but also acknowledging that it's going to be an issue probably for the rest of your life. That's a big step to acknowledge that. I applaud you for creating that boundary for yourself, because I think it's really important. Okay, so what was it like to get that phone call?
Surreal, awful,
Do you remember what you were doing when you got it?
I will never forget anything about it. It was 4th of July. And so I had been out that night before. I was going through a divorce, which was already tough enough. So my life was already somewhat upside down. I had been married for 10 years. I was 34, I guess, because I got married at 24 to somebody I met at 18, so very young. And I was going through divorce and hadn't even told my family yet that was happening. We were separated. I don't think I had really even talked to my mom about it much, because I was kind of removed from them at that point and embarrassed. I think as some people experience, especially somebody who'd been married so long and so young and was hell-bent on making it work. I had a mom who'd been divorced multiple times, so I was like, I'm going to be the one who gets it right. And so I had been out that night before. I was separated but not divorced, and was out with another man that night, and then came home. I was already kind of acting foolish and crazy because I was going through a divorce, or had married someone very young. So I was kind of like, I'm single and I'm going to be crazy. And so I was going out and drinking and partying and having fun. And so I came home probably in very early hours. I was still in the clothes I'd been wearing that night. And the phone rang at probably 9:30 or 9:30, I think. And I was still like, for me, it was super early because I had been out really late. And it was my dad, who I never talked to. And he said, Becky, I have some upsetting news. And then he said, your brother has died. And I remember thinking, well, that's sort of more than upsetting. Like, I thought, even then, I think maybe because I'm an editor and writer, like word choice, I thought, well, that was interesting word choice, Dad. Upsetting.
I'm sorry for laughing.
No,
it's kind of funny.
It is. But my dad's not a very emotional man. So I think for him, that was the right word. But to me, I was like, well, when he said I have upsetting news, I was thinking, immediately you start to think, well, what could that be? And my brother being dead certainly wasn't it, because that didn't seem like the right setup for that. And so I remember feeling kind of numb. I kind of did that, like, I think it sort of played out like you see in a movie in a way. Like, I kind of said, no, it can't, no. I threw the phone down. I screamed. I was home alone because my husband at the time had moved out. I didn't know what to do. I was living in a separate state from my family. So I started walking around my house, like numb, in a daze, like, what do I do? Got into my car and drove to a friend's house who I really wasn't actually friends with anymore, because she kind of had chose my husband in the divorce and not me, but she lived 2 blocks away. So I thought, well, I'll go here. She wasn't home. Got back in my car. I started trying to call some friends. Nobody was answering. It's 9:30 in the morning on 4th of July. I guess people are busy. So I drove to my friend's mom's house, my former friend's mom's house, and she answered the door, and I sort of fell into a puddle. And then I just people just kind of took care of me from there. My soon to be ex called. And then I remember falling to my knees in the front yard on the phone, having to say these words, my brother had died. And that felt like, even in the moment, I think this feels so cliche, but I just couldn't function. And so my friends my former friend and then a current friend finally came over. They packed up my clothes. I just sat there and watched things kind of happening around me in a whirl, not really kind of knowing what was going on. And then they packed me up, and soon I was in a car driving home, and I didn't really talk much on the drive there. It was with this friend who wasn't really a friend, so it was all very awkward. And then I got to my mom's house and hugged her and then started crying. And then that was kind of, from there, it was like things just kind of happened. And then at some point, once I was home and in my mom's arms, then it was like I kind of had to take over again in a way. Like I think it's something interesting. People don't talk about sibling loss very much.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think, like, it's not something I think people really hear much about. We hear a lot about parents losing their children and how awful that is. And I can't imagine, now that I have a kid, I think even more about like what my mom went through, and it must be so hard. But you don't really hear as much about the impact on siblings, and particularly on adult siblings, because we're adults and I guess you're supposed to be okay with it. But at 34 and your brother dying at 30, and it's not really, that's young. That's not when you're supposed to go. And then because parents are having this really deep loss, a lot of things fall on the siblings. Like, I had to kind of help find the funeral home and hold my mom through things and help make decisions and all of that. And so it was really hard because I felt like I kind of had to put a pin on my grief and sort of be strong through that week of, that whole process of figuring out the cremation and the funeral service and all of that. And so I kind of didn't start my grieving process until later. And I think even just putting that pin on it kind of pushed it even farther away than it should have, because then I ended up ignoring it for quite a while.
Yeah. Wow. I have 2 younger sisters. So this story is hitting home for me for sure. I'm 30 right now, so I cannot imagine. I really don't even know what that would do to our family or my life if any of that happened. So out of curiosity and a sense of like, maybe if I learn from somebody else what they did, how can I prepare myself for how to pick myself up from that place? Like, once you realize you're on the puddle or you're in the puddle in front of somebody's house.
Yeah.
How do you bring yourself back to some sort of sense of normalcy?
Well, so you said something about pulling myself out of the abyss, or whatever the phrase was used. And I think you said I had to go through it more than once. So I will say this was the first time. And what I can say from this first experience was, don't do the things I did. I learned a lot from this experience. And the next time I had to go through some grief, I behaved very differently because of what I learned through the first time. And so what I'll say, here's the don't do's. Don't try to pretend like it didn't happen, because I did a lot of that, followed by partying a lot to forget that it had happened. And so I had a business, and I had been in business at that point for, at least 5 years. And I, at first, didn't really tell my clients anything. I don't know if it didn't even occur to me, or I was just so, I don't know, so out of it. And so my work, I kind of just let things fall and not get done. So don't do that. Don't try to pretend like everything's okay, but then not deliver. That's a sure way to tick clients off. And so I burned a lot of bridges because I was just not focused. And I wanted to be. I think I wanted to be strong. I wanted to be strong through it, and I could do this. But it wasn't just a death, which was huge, but it was also a divorce. And with that divorce also came having to move. So there was a lot of things going on at once. But I am the kind of person who's always been like the strong one in my family. I think like we're talking about, where I had to sort of keep everybody else okay. And so I felt like I needed to still be strong and I could get through this. And so I really burned a lot of bridges. And didn't even care. I didn't turn to any support system. I didn't really rely on my family. Instead, I just kind of went out and acted foolish. I was just crazy for a year. I let myself fall down that hole of grief. And it's so easy to do because it is so awful. And the having to feel the feelings feels overwhelming. It's like, I don't want to do that. So the easier thing to do, it seems, is just to ignore it and go down this dark path of like just being alone and whatever. And so, yeah, it took me a year, a good year. It was actually a bad year, but a solid year of just dropping balls, not asking for help, doing stupid stuff, drinking too much, just being silly. And then after more than a year, I finally started to come to a little, like, I came out of the haze, and I really was just in a haze. And so it was almost like if I had asked for help, maybe I could have gotten some help and I wouldn't have gotten into that haze. But because I didn't, I was so in that haze that like I couldn't really do anything to help myself anyway. Like I was just numb. And so after about a year and a half, I guess, is when I really started to think like, I can't continue living like this. Like it's not healthy. It's not productive. It's not changing the fact that my brother is dead. The first anniversary of his death was really hard. I mean, really hard. And I think that may have been the starting point of me kind of saying like, okay, I need to make some changes. And then that whole summer, I was still acting stupid and I pissed off some friends and was like, why, who am I? This isn't even who I want to be. I'm just acting so dumb and making dumb choices. And so finally I was like, I have to do something. But at this point, my business was so decimated. I only had a few clients left and was not making enough money and had kind of burned through some retirement funds trying to live and had moved out of my big house into an apartment because I had to, and was like, okay, what am I going to do? Like, I have to make a decision here. And at that time, my mom and I had started to talk more, and she was in a pretty bad place too. And so I was like, I need to help her. And so finally she said, why don't you come stay here? Which felt like, oh, I'm a 36-year-old woman. Like, I'm going to go live with my mom. But I also was like, what else am I going to do? What I'm doing now isn't working. So I thought I would go and spend 6 months with her. And then my grand plan was I was going to go move to San Diego and live on the beach. And like, I think I kind of thought of it as more like, I'll just pause and I'll fix everything real quick. And then I'll go back and like live this fun life again. And that didn't happen. But making that decision to go back into the nest was the smartest thing I did for myself and for my mom. And it was at that same time that I started to finally talk about things. I started to blog about my grief and just share. And that experience really helped because as I started to blog about it, I started to get a lot of responses from other people who had lost adult siblings and hearing their experiences, and also from people who had lost family to drug overdoses. And both of those experiences are unique experiences that lots of people go through. I don't know how much we always talk about it. So hearing from other people and knowing I wasn't alone, first of all, and that my sharing was helping other people really helped me. And so I just focused on fitness physically and mentally and took some time off. I still did some work. I started to try and rebuild some client relationships after a few months. So I probably spent the first like 4 or 5 months really just focused on getting it out there, getting it out of me, the grief, and then started to think about, okay, now I also have to go back to like functioning as an adult and making a living. And so I started to try and rebuild some of those business relationships, find new business relationships, rethink what my business meant and what I was doing. I totally changed my approach to business at that point, and it's been massive growth because of that.
I'm curious, just because I'm curious, what kind of business model did you have before and how did you change it?
Right. So I spent the first 7 years of my business or so as just a freelancer. I'm putting that in air quotes, just a freelancer. Like when someone asked me, I was like, oh, I'm just a freelancer. Like that's how I thought of myself. I'm just a writer, or I just write stuff. But I didn't really think of it as a business. I never introduced myself as a business owner. I didn't say I had a business. In fact, I didn't have an official business because I was a sole proprietor on my taxes. I still used my social security number, all of that. I didn't think of it as a business. And so it was really about mind shifts, a mindset shift more than anything of like, okay, I need to actually think of this as a business if I want it to be a business. And so that's in the last, like 2 or 3 years, what I've really been doing is refocusing myself as a business. I actually got an LLC, I got an EIN, I got a business bank account. Like I sort of took all of those steps. I try to think of myself and introduce myself as a business owner. I just really started treating my business differently. And then that helped to attract a different kind of client. Because I was shifting away from, I had previously done a lot of magazine writing. Magazines are dying. It's a different world now. And so I was also making a shift from magazine writing to doing more work for corporate or business clients. And having that mindset shift helped in that, because I think businesses want to hire other businesses. And so the fact that I was treating myself as a business, I think made a big difference on who I was attracting.
Yeah, that makes a difference. I completely agree with that. That taking the steps to legitimize your work for yourself only does it externally for other people as well. And then you get that completely different response from potential clients if you are treating yourself differently. And that goes from legitimizing your business to an LLC or introducing yourself as having a new shingle outside your door or, any of those things. Before we jump back into our conversation today, I want to let you know about a free class I've put together for you. Especially if you've been running yourself ragged with everything required to be successful as a creative entrepreneur or an artist or a musician or fill in the blank. You can register for the class for free by going to businessofbravery.com/free-class. So if I'm being honest with you, you're probably exhausted by the whole idea of self-promotion because you're doing it wrong. And I know there's a seemingly endless list of things we have to do when we're running a creative business, but numbing how awkward it feels to promote yourself and bringing yourself to the point of total exhaustion, it's not the solution. So in the class, we talk all about the ingredients inside of your unique self-promotion recipe, and you'll get to hear a little more about my own journey with all things self-promotion, self-image, and personal bravery. You can sign up for the class for free, again, by going to businessofbravery.com/free-class. So if you know your work is awesome, but you feel like you're figuratively yelling at brick walls or going down burnout highway at 100 miles per hour or not getting the response you'd like from your attempts to put yourself out there, then I'll see you in class, because bottom line, we really need your work out there in the world. And in turn, this means we need you to show up for it with your whole brave, kick-ass self. And we need you to do that every day. So go ahead and visit businessofbravery.com/free-class, and let's get back to the conversation. So we've got the list of don't do's, and we started going down the list of things that you should do after you've touched the bottom of the barrel or the bottom of the abyss or whatever. I would like to chime in with some things too, because what I've noticed in my own life, I have had, I healed from an eating disorder while owning and starting a business. I have since gone through a couple seasons of depression while owning a business. I've also had like a pretty big life-altering health diagnosis that affected my business directly. So I have a lot of experience in building my own toolkit for when you have the oh shit days where you wake up and you're like, I just can't do today. Like I really can't do today. So one of the things that I've noticed that's been so helpful for me is to have that list of the bare minimum list, basically, so that you can say, okay, today is a bare minimum day. I'm giving myself I'm not taking the full day off, but I'm giving myself permission to do the bare minimum so that my health can breathe, so that my mental health can breathe. I forget who gave me that advice, but it was good. I've gone to that list several times. Sometimes it just looks like only respond to the urgent emails, turn your phone on silent, unplug, don't do any social media that day, only do the meetings that you just can't reschedule. So if it's a podcast day and I've got interviews scheduled, I'll do the interviews, but I won't do all of the admin stuff both before and after each of the interviews. And I'll like let myself do all that stuff the following day or another day. So those bare minimum days save you, because I think it's part of that, like you said, that acknowledgement of I'm in a haze. I can't live here forever, but this right now is not normal. And so giving yourself that bare minimum day is like choosing not to push it away, basically choosing not to distract yourself with just busy work. Have you noticed anything, or do you have something similar to that?
Well, I hadn't thought of it, but I do that as well. So, I mean, for me now, it's more about just life is too busy. And, because now I have a baby. And so now it's like, I have plenty of days where I think like today, my kid is sick. And I'm learning because he's just 9 months. And so I'm learning when you have a sick baby, it's really hard emotionally on mommy, not just on baby. And like, I just want to be there to hold him all day. But there are things that have to get done because I do own a business.
Mm-hmm.
And yesterday I took most of the day with him. So today is, I guess, that bare minimum day in the same way where I'm like, okay, I have 2 things I have to do today. Okay, I'll get those 2 things done. And then I give myself permission to say, okay, my baby needs me, and that's more important. And I'm learning all about this whole like baby life balance or whatever it is that we talk about. But with like, having to have a business, I have to make money. We still all have to do that. So I have to do those activities, but then I also have to be the caretaker for my child. That's my job too. And so learning how to balance those and not have massive guilt about either one, like trying to be here fully for this right now and not thinking about my sick baby in the other room. But then when I'm with him, trying to learn how to be there for him fully and not think about, oh God, I have all these things I need to get done for my business. And so it's really hard. It's been an interesting thing to learn.
Do you think, because I know, just because I've done my research on you, I know you also have had in between those, like the lull in your business, you had what some people call a bridge job, which I have too. Like I have acquired, sometimes it's a client that I wouldn't normally work with, or sometimes it's just straight up a contract job doing like sales stuff that I really don't jive with. It's definitely not my bag, but like, hey, it's, some extra cash. And it is hard to make the choice to do that because like you said, it's the choosing to be with something that is not the other thing you want to be with. Whether it's a baby or a bridge job or a relationship or going through a divorce or going through grief or depression, like there's an element of choosing to do the thing you don't necessarily want to do, but because it's the best thing for everyone all around. And
I don't know if it was the best thing. So the first time I went through my horrible experience with my brother's death, I took a job for about a year. It was during that year of me sort of being crazy. And it was really just because I was like, I got to make money. I got to afford my apartment. But I could have invested myself more fully in my business had I done some of the right steps to get some support. But since I didn't, I wasn't able to invest myself in my business and instead just took this job that I probably wasn't the best fit, probably wasn't the smartest move, but I was like, I got to do something. So when I went through the next bad experience, which we haven't talked about, but I had a miscarriage a couple of years ago, and I found myself going through having those same sort of feelings, but because I'd been through it before and because I had learned what not to do, I was able to stop myself when I was doing certain behaviors. So that time I also started to panic about money and my business and everything else. And I did take another job that wasn't a good fit. It wasn't smart, but I left it after not even 3 months because I realized this isn't the right fit. This isn't something I should have been doing. And I was able to get the help I needed that time and stop myself and say, okay, I'm going to invest myself in my business and do the right things. And it's only because I had been through that experience before that I knew taking a job out of, desperation isn't really, there are times you have to do that. And I'm not saying that, people don't have to do that.
Totally.
But it wasn't necessarily the right move for me. And I learned that first time around.
Well, I know too that like when you're thinking about, so first of all, bridge jobs or moving in with your parents or whatever, all of those actions or those moments are choices that give one area of your life more breath and more space to heal and do the thing it needs to do, right? So for seasons of my life, like where I've accepted a bridge job, has been because my brain and my soul were just tired of the striving, and I needed to give myself some space to put my head on correctly before I jumped back in and did the thing I really wanted to do. Mm-hmm. So it's easier for me to accept those positions or those jobs or make the lifestyle choices, the bridge lifestyle choices, when I know it's not permanent. Absolutely. When I know it's like, okay, I'm going to do this for 6 months and it'll give myself some breath, and then I can jump back in.
But I think you have to know yourself well to make the right choices in those situations. Because for me, moving in with my mom was that. It gave me that space for breathing and figuring it out. And I don't regret that. The job thing, I think, actually contributed more to my problems. Because I think maybe for me, it was something that I did draw a lot of my self-worth. But I think even more than that, what I know about myself is I don't work well for other people. It's just not who I am. I need to be my own boss. I have learned this about myself over the last 12 years of owning my business and having taken some bridge jobs and knowing that about myself. So the first time through, it's because you don't know. But that second time, when I started to kind of go through those same things and feel those feelings of desperation and acting out of the, whenever you're acting from a place of desperation, it's a bad place to be because you're not making sound decisions. And so being able to take that time to say, know myself and know what I needed, and having learned from my experience and say, no, you're just feeling this desperation, but like the truth is, and going back for those 3 months of that place, I immediately got that correction of, no, this isn't helping you. This isn't giving you that breathing space you're talking about. It's actually suffocating you. It's making it worse. It's contributing to your problems because now you're having all those same feelings of like whenever I work for someone else, I start to feel really angry and resentful, and I don't feel good about myself. And it's not good for me. And so adding that onto feeling depression, going through that miscarriage, I didn't know it at the time, but I was depressed. Adding all of that on top of it wasn't helpful. Now being with my mom, and even though that did feel a little deflating and like, oh, I'm a grown woman living with my parents, my mom, that was beneficial, because I was going to a place of love and support, and it was providing me that breathing room, and it was helping my soul. Whereas being, working for someone else wasn't doing that. And that's just me. That's knowing myself. Everyone's different. So someone else may find that bridge job provides them that relief and they don't feel those feelings. It's not icky for them. It's just something that helps them get through the time and they look at it short term. But living with their mom might be the thing that would push them over the edge. So totally. We're all different. But for me, I think it's, one of the things I've learned through this is I think you need to know yourself and have faith and trust in your knowledge of yourself so that when something like this comes up, you can fall back on that and say, these are the things I know about myself. Like, even though right now I'm feeling lost and I'm in a haze, I do at least know this much about myself. I can't live with my mom, or I can't work for someone else, or whatever those things are. When you said about like preparing yourself, not that I would wish a death of a sibling or a miscarriage on no one. We all will experience grief in our life because no one is immune. I mean, I can't imagine. Very few of us are immune from ever having to lose it. We're all going to lose someone we love. It happens. And so I wouldn't want people to spend a lot of time preparing for it. That's pretty morose. But I do think that, if you learn anything from this, it is like, know yourself and to thine own self be true. Like, how very lofty, but it's true. Like, know who you are enough that when you do start to get lost in those times of depression or overwhelm or whatever, that you can at least fall back to those core things about you and say, I don't know much right now. I know I'm lost, but I know at least this much about myself, because that will help guide you when you're in that place. And I think the first time, one of the reasons I was going through a divorce was I didn't really know myself. I had gotten married too young. I had spent a lot of my life caretaking for my family. Like, I didn't know who I was. And so following my divorce, I spent a lot of time acting crazy, but also doing a lot of self-discovery and learning about myself. So then, a few years later, when I went through the miscarriage, I was on more sure footing because I knew enough about myself. I knew who I was. And although I still fell into depression and I still had some of the same kind of reactions come up, I was able to stop and catch myself and make smarter choices, better choices for myself because I knew who I was and I knew what I needed fundamentally.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think it's really, really true. The deal breakers, knowing your deal breakers ahead of time is paramount. When you're dating, when you're owning a business, when you're dealing with depression or mental illness, like having a list of those deal breakers is crucial. So that's really great advice. One of the other things that I do is I kind of already mentioned this a little bit, but I will unplug from media. There's something, I can't quite put my finger on it just yet, but there's something about like turning the phone completely off and opting out of social media for the day or opting out of watching the news or whatever. And I think it has to do with giving yourself breath and space and cutting out some of that noise. That really helps me.
Yeah. And for someone like me who is that I got to be strong kind of person and who tends to swallow feelings rather than feeling them. And, I put up walls and barriers doing that kind of thing. I hate it because I like distractions. I want to keep myself distracted. But when I force myself to do it, I have to feel the feelings. And there is a point, I think, when you're going through any kind of depression or difficulty where you just have to force yourself to feel it. And you can keep pushing it off and finding distractions and sitting on Twitter or whatever. But eventually you're going to have to feel it. And so when you finally can get to that place of forcing yourself to do that, I really believe now that that's the only way to move forward. It sucks. It's not fun,
Mm-hmm.
but you kind of have to do it. And so I agree with the just sort of closing everything off so that you're not, especially if you're someone like me, like forcing yourself to say, I will not have distractions.
Oh man, I have to force myself too.
Yeah.
It's not an easy choice. That's for sure.
I think most of us, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like most people don't like to feel bad. I think that there are a few people maybe who do, but I think most of us don't really love feeling shitty. And so we avoid it, which makes total sense. I feel like it's probably something in biology where we're like programmed to try not to feel shitty. But sometimes you just have to feel shitty as much as that sucks.
It's true. It's true. And you already talked a little bit about this. You touched on it briefly about blogging. But one of the things that I do is I do morning pages on most days. But writing in like stream of consciousness style is one of the best pieces of advice I could give to anybody for anything really, but especially for feeling the feelings, because it's just like rapid fire, let it out there and then delete it afterwards. Like throw it away afterwards. Don't let anybody else read it. There's no need for it because you already felt the feelings.
I don't have the discipline for morning pages. I've always wanted to. I'm really interested in Julia Cameron, right, with the idea of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And I've read the book and I love the idea and I've tried it. I don't have discipline for that. So it always falls apart. But I will say that anytime I'm going through something bad, whenever I'm having, if it's a relationship problem or if it's, going through the miscarriage or the death or anything else, I do find myself turning to pen and paper. And I'm a writer by nature. It's what I do for a living and it's just who I am. So that might be part of it. But like I find myself wanting that feeling of pen on paper. Like there's something cathartic about actually, because I actually feel the feelings like both literally and figuratively because I'm actually feeling myself writing them out. And so I always turn to that. That's one of those things that just suddenly I find myself doing and it does help. And I do throw it away. Like I very rarely do anything with any of it. The blogging was a rare thing where I actually decided I'm going to blog about this. Although I did write about my miscarriage too, because one of the things I did learn from the first experience was I think there's a lot of power in being open about your feelings with people. Like a lot of times, I don't know, it's weird. There's like some sort of shame around a lot of things. For some reason in this country, addiction is something that's very shameful. People don't want to talk about addiction. And so like, there's still plenty of people in my family I don't think are real thrilled that I talk about my brother's addiction and overdose. Like they want to sort of think that that's not what really happened, or we don't want people to know because he was a good person. He was fundamentally, but he was troubled. And people are, and it wasn't his fault. I mean, mental illness is not someone's fault. And so I think people try to not talk about those things. And miscarriage is another one that for some reason people don't. It's very private, and I know that. But also there's a lot of power in sharing, because when I finally decided to talk about it, I thought I was so alone and maybe I had done something wrong and all of these things that come up. And then suddenly you're like, oh my God, every woman I know has had a miscarriage. Like, it's unbelievable how many people have been through those experiences. And when you find those bonds and you have that shared experience with someone, there's something about that makes you feel better, because suddenly it's not your fault and you're not alone. And, there is someone else you can talk to, and you don't feel crazy or wrong or whatever it is. And so it's not for everyone. Not everyone's comfortable with being that public and sharing. But I will say I found a lot of power in doing that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there again, we're touching again on the boundaries of bravery. And, bravery, it takes a brave person to put up boundaries. It also takes a brave person to pull down the boundaries as well, to be vulnerable and be honest with what you're going through or with what someone else is going through. So, and what that does is it touches back to the first thing that you suggested, which is surround yourself with community. Because when you reveal yourself or take down some of that boundary or the wall that you had isolating you, naturally what that means is it gives you space and other people's space to come surround you and not isolate you, So it's kind of a domino effect.
Yeah, saying I need help, I think, can be the three hardest words for a lot of people to say, including myself. I think anyone who's wired in the way of feeling like they have to be strong, or there's some sort of shame in, not being able to do everything yourself or whatever it is, saying I need help is really hard. But if you can get yourself to utter those words, I assure you there will be someone there who will be willing to help. Like, you don't always feel it when you're putting up those walls and forcing people away, but it's amazing when just putting that down and inviting people in and just being honest and just saying I need help, like, people will be there to help you and support you and love you, and that's the best way out of that stuff. It's so hard when you're in it though to do it, and I know that, but if you can just make yourself do it, it will change everything.
Mm-hmm. It's true. Oh God, it's so hard to say though.
It is so hard. It's hard to say in anything, and not even just something monumental like grieving over death, but just like, I need help because I don't know how to create my own graphics for my blog. Like, even somebody like me, that's hard to admit, but I've just recently hired a VA for the first time. Like, I've actually hired some help with things, and I'm like, oh my God, why didn't I do this a million years ago? Because I still find myself fighting that. Like, I don't want to ask for help. I can do it all. Like, I think it's American. I don't know what it is. There's something about us. We're all just so wired to, like, we can handle anything. We can do everything. I got nerves of steel, whatever. And just like getting some help on my business tasks has changed my life. Like, suddenly I have more mental capacity for my baby and time to do other things in my life and enjoy, my free time and whatever. Like, but it's just that simple saying, I need help. So,
well, and this is not something that maybe everybody could do, or every business owner could do, but if you find yourself face first going into a dark season, and you have the financial wherewithal to hire an assistant, that's the time to do it. Because just having that assistant alone, even if they're doing stuff that, yes, you could do by yourself, it gives you, again, that space for the big thing, the big elephant in the room, whether it's a death, a miscarriage, a depression, whatever. So asking for help, both professional help from a therapist or from a VA or from your mom watching the kids or whatever, that is really, really valuable.
yeah. And, I recognize that I've been through some big things, and it won't be the last. There will be more stuff that's going to happen. It always does to all of us. My parents are aging, who knows what it could be. There's a million things that can go on. My kid just got sick, it's a cold, he'll be fine, but still it shuts your life down temporarily. There's a very good chance that when I go through menopause, I'll get depressed. Like, who knows? Like, there's things that's going to come up. And so it's not the last time. And so having been through those things, and with everything I've learned, that is part of it, is like, okay, what can I do to prepare not just myself, but my business for the future when things will happen again, because they will. And so like for the first time in my business, which is now, I now look at as a business, I am trying to assemble a team, not full-time people. I can't afford that, but having people that support my business. And so that if something happens, I won't be as frantic and operating from that place of desperation. Like, oh my God, my business still has to go and I'm the only one who can do it. And because again, that puts me in a bad place. And I've learned that. So trying to have some of those fail safes established ahead of time so that my business can continue to function when inevitably something bad happens again. And that will help to eliminate one more stressor during those hard times. And so that's a good, like you just said, it's a good thing to think about. Even though we don't want to think about bad things happening, they do. And so it's smart to kind of prepare your business for it. And it's hard when you're a solopreneur to do that. But you still have to kind of think about those things and think about what you can do in advance.
It's true. It's true. Oh my gosh, this has been such a great conversation.
Yeah, definitely. I've enjoyed it. And it's been emotional, but fun.
Yes. So I want to give you permission to take 5 minutes alone in the closet before you go back out into the real world.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know. Well, I could take at least a couple. I try breastfeeding, so I only get so much time away from him at once.
That's true.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again, Becky, and keep in touch. We want to hear everything you're up to, and we're all cheering for you.
Thank you. That's very nice to hear, and thank you very much for this. It's been great.
So as I mentioned before we started talking with Becky, your brave takeaway from today's episode is a really sweet worksheet which will help you to get a starting point for creating your own bare minimum to-do list. I know it seems kind of strange to need help making a list of things you shouldn't do, but believe me, as a business owner who sometimes needs to take those fudget days, it's really helpful. And there's a bit of an art that goes into deciding which tasks are necessary to keeping your business running smoothly and which tasks aren't. The worksheet is available to download in the show notes for this episode, so just pop over to barenakedbravery.com and search for Becky Mollenkamp's episode to grab yourself a copy. Becky and I would love to hear all about your favorite parts of today's Bare Naked Bravery. You can find Becky Mollenkamp and myself on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and all the other places. Just go ahead and tag us so that we can cheer you on and see what you're up to. And that's our show this week. Thank you again for listening. I know that there is so much that you could be doing in a day, and Becky and I do not take it lightly that you chose to listen to both of our stories and both of our opinions on these really important topics. So if you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it for you, then please give us a review and rate the show in your iTunes desktop app or on your podcast app on your phone. It really does help us out a lot more than it is a hassle for you. Because here's the deal, all of the bravery that is shared in this show, it is profound. It shocks me and it brings goosebumps. It gives me goosebumps to think that I get to help share it. And you are also a part of that. So that's where this comes in, sharing this episode if it means something to you or if you think somebody else would enjoy listening to Becky's story or get something out of it. Go ahead and share it with them. In fact, here's a review from Jenny K22 from iTunes. She says, Emily has the most interesting guests and knows just the right questions to ask to dig out inspiration. I have loved every episode. I'm so grateful, Jenny. Thank you for leaving that review. It's really great to hear any kind of response, even if it's negative, you guys. It doesn't have to be awesome. We really appreciate you, and we really appreciate any kind of sharing that you do with your friends. We also really appreciate Music Box Licensing. They are a premier creative music agency dedicated to finding and crafting unique soundtracks. To find out more about all the artists, musicians, and other sponsors of the show, go to barenakedbravery.com/sponsors. I'm looking forward to being with you guys next week because we have some really great things in store for you as always. But until then, I have one message for you. Also, like always, it's this: be yourself, be vulnerable, be brave, because the world needs more of your bare naked bravery.